have a little change, so I will start and my dear colleague Luca will continue. Welcome back to the first lecture of March. We are very happy to have Myrto Veikou with a very interesting topic, and it's again one of the aims of the ByzantiumatAnkara, using new perspectives, technologies, providing more interdisciplinary lectures to the students, scholars. So I think we are always trying to follow these missions as well, and it's one of them. So identifying hybrid spaces and makeshift spatial practices within the Byzantine period of transformation, 6th to 9th centuries, the potential of archaeology and textual evidence is the title, quite a long one, and I am thrilled to hear more on that. And I know that you have just completed, or maybe last year, a couple of months ago, your second PhD. So congratulations, Myrto, for your second PhD as well. And I'm sure that you will all have an enjoyable lecture. But I will pass the word to my dear colleague, Luca, and he will introduce our speaker in depth. So, Luca, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Serjan. Well, Serjan already briefly or partially introduced. Myrto was recently, as correctly stated, received her second PhD from the University of Uppsala, where she specialized on Byzantine philology. But she's also, Myrto is an accomplished scholar who had worked extensively on Byzantine landscape and settlement. In particular, I want to stress her groundbreaking work stemming from her first PhD thesis on Southern Epirus, the Western Greek mainland, which was published in 2012. She has been working on several projects since then on Byzantine culture in Greece. She has been a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Athens, University of Crete, National Hellenic Research Foundation, Foundation of the Hellenic World, and she is the author of, and I would rather say numerous, I want to say endless, otherwise we're going to kill them most probably, publications. But I want to stress, I mean, most probably she's going, or she may want to talk about later on a recent project which is going to lead her to take her to Turkey together with other colleagues like Alexander Bayhammer, who also was here exactly 1 year ago, talking about Byzantine, late Byzantine Anatolia. So, Myrto, it's a pleasure having you here. We were hoping, I mean, it's a long standing invitation. We were hoping to have you here in person, but who knows, maybe in the future. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation and looking forward to your talk. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Luca, for your nice words. And it's such a pleasure and such an honor to be taking part in this so successful seminar series applicant, and to be hosted today. And I'm starting sharing my PowerPoint presentation, so can take this along. And you already mentioned my title, so I will start by talking to you about my problem today. By the way, we can talk about the new project at Izmir. We can talk about it perhaps in the discussion. I chose to talk about something else today because the Izmir project is still in the making, and we don't have any results to present yet, but hopefully we can do that in the future. And also it was such a big challenge to be able to discuss with all of you, especially with Luca, who's a very long time specialist on these issues, on this theme today. So my problem is spatial practices today. And yes, it is. You're not watching another lecture, so I'm showing you a crane. And it's a crane full of birds. So here in Uppsala, we live in a new quarter, so there's a lot of construction going on for the last 2 years. So there is this crane standing there almost permanently. And I've been witnessing the following thing. So every day at dusk, there is flocks of birds just flying atop this crane and sitting there in regular intervals. They stay there for approximately 1 hour, independently of the weather. Even when it's a snowstorm, as today, they are there, and it's a meeting point for them. They stay for a while and then just fly away. And I've been very curious about this. And if there is any bird watchers, please, in the audience, please let me know what you think. I've been reading a little bit, and I understand that for the birds, flying to a high point, it's a way to choose a mate or find a place to sleep, because the most dangerous time of the day of the 24 hours for them is the sleeping time. That's where they're more vulnerable. And there may be more meanings in that, but this is a special practice. This is what we actually do. It's a social practice that is inevitably spatial and embodied. It is, for example, the way in the Southern Mediterranean, we will go as a family in the harbor for a walk on a summer evening. It's the way we would go out in the square. It is something we do that goes as an unwritten, as a custom, as an unwritten rule, as a way of living down from parent to child, and from generation to generation. So now, why is that important though? And now we'll need to look a little bit in my notes. So as Shorter of 1993, as intellectuals, we pay most attention to those kinds of activity in which we suppose people to know what they are doing, in which they put their plans into action or theories into practice. But there are many other human activities in which, though we may be loath to admit it, we all remain deeply ignorant as to what we are doing or why we're doing it. Not because the ideas or whatever supposedly in us somewhere informing our actions are too deeply buried to bring out into the light of day, but because the formative influences shaping our conduct are not wholly there in our individual heads to be brought out. Activity of this kind occurs in response to what others have already done, and we act just as much into the opportunities or against the barriers and restrictions they offer or afford us as out of any plans or desires of our own. Thus, the stony looks, the nods of agreement, the failures of interest, the asking of questions, these all go towards what it is one feels one can or cannot do or say in such situations. It's joint action. It's a spontaneous, unself-conscious, unknowing, although not unknowledgeable kind of activity. So all that one feels that one can or cannot do or say in a given situation, all our joint action, our spontaneous, our self-conscious, unknowing, although not unknowledgeable kind of activity, according to Shorter, sums up into the social practices developed within a certain culture. Therefore, one's insight into culture goes through the scrutiny of both those social practices and the spaces they produce. Furthermore, societies do not share a single culture. They present cultural plurality, diversity, and this is expressed through spatial transformations. For example, the National Theatre at Athens and several other theatre halls were officially subdivided in many small residential units by the Greek government so as to host refugees arriving from Turkey in the early 1920s. And yet another famous theater in another European capital, the Teatro Valle in Rome, was also transformed and subdivided in small residential units in the years 2011-2014, a story probably all of you remember, in a totally different context. So it was quoted as part of a culture developed in Europe for many decades, of self-organized social centers in squatted buildings, such as the cinema you're looking at, which serve as residence and as meeting places for the youth. And in the web page, I could retrieve some publications about squatting in Europe. And I would like you to notice the special terms in those titles. So it's all about claiming space. Squatting is all about claiming space and about urban identity. And now, if we would only see the material remains of the buildings and in the buildings, deprived of any other information on their social context, how could we ever reconstruct these particular social practices and their cultural background? Often, the material remains are the only ones we have of past societies, antique or medieval. How can we make sense of spatial transformations by means of social practices? Is my main question. Today, I propose some ways of comprehending Byzantine cultures by means of combining a thorough reading of the available material remains with a focalized analysis of contemporary written texts. Within the theoretical framework that I just explained, I want to build upon previous reflections on Byzantine productions of space between the 6th and the 9th century and respective issues about urban and rural dichotomies. I propose a disciplinary view that combines a consideration of archaeological evidence and literary traditions, both dating at the same period, with modern cultural theoretical approaches in spatial studies. I focus upon the process by which changes in the use of spaces lead to spatial transformation. Who were the agents is my main question. And what practices did they use is my second one. According to the scholarship on the production and the interpretation of space through cultural practices, we have to think of spatial transformation in 3 different ways. So as the expressions of social and cultural change, as a means for and an agent of change, and as the origin and the cause of further change. This conceptualization is important because the spatial transformation that archaeologists end up recording means more than the response of historical societies to natural and social transformations. We need to understand the ways in which living in a changing environment also provokes changes in that particular society's perceptions of space, etc. These changes affect in return people's spatial conceptions, production, and practices in a vicious circle that never ends within a culture. So some central theoretical questions in the case of the Byzantine culture in the 6th to 9th centuries are: how did changes in the use of spaces result into spatial transformation? And what could have been the cultural meaning of that transformation? So today I will comment on the meaning of specific Byzantine practices which were used for changing the use of space between these centuries: encroachment, subdivision, expansion, and fortification. Due to time restrictions, I will only focus on the first 3 because I see them very closely related in a specific context that I will explain. These contemporary phenomena occurred at the same time all over the Byzantine world, and they've been largely discussed from a socio-economic point of view, but here I will consider them from a socio-cultural point of view, through a scrutiny of the meaning of respective habitual spatial practices. And here is my main questions. Were these practices somehow centrally encouraged, imposed, or coordinated? Or did they just fall into those elements that unite contemporary societies? Technology, for example, materials, custom. Second, both spatial practices reveal social and cultural transformation. How can they be interpreted within the Byzantine paradigm? And third, all practices derive from interactions between structures and agencies. How are those defined? So hearing what follows, I discuss how these practices transformed the Byzantine landscapes from the 6th and 9th century as a response to a great and central challenge of that period. So I will be looking at archaeological evidence regarding these practices in the specific historical context, literary texts from the same context, and I will consider the history and meaning of these special practices in modern times. I intend to show how these coincident special practices, and yet apparently different, since one takes place in cities, the others in the countryside, but they were in fact very much related. Their mutual relation refers to their cultural, performative background as inscribed in diachronic and global strategies in settlement. So, to start from transformation, from the period, a tone of ink has been put down regarding the history of Byzantine society and settlement transformation in Byzantium in these centuries, and you have an excellent expert of that, so I won't be tiring you with this. I'm sure Luca has done a fantastic job for several decades now, and you can find references in the published paper. So I will just outline a handful of points of consensus about to sketch the main features of this period. So regarding society, we have a marked retreat from urban life towards a more defensible and eventually fortified sites. We have decline in interregional exchange, survival of a society of some complexity, producing sufficient surplus to sustain the military and bureaucratic systems. And we have a society that should be viewed as a result of a multiplicity of interacting relationships and social structures. When it comes to settlement, demography, and economy, we observe an extensive transformation in the urban fabrics from the middle 6th century onwards, and Luca's PhD is fantastic on that. We mark a retrenchment of urban life around the middle 7th century with regional variations in pace and intensity. We observe an increasing focus on a defensive capability, a fragmentation of local exchange and production, a dislocation of population by means of forced or voluntary migration, desertion or abandonment of the most marginal agricultural lands, and differentiated regional demographic decline, phenomena connected to a major climatic change around 700, as it was recently shown. And we have now agreed that we are looking at economic diversity rather than economic decline. A set of special practices during this period within the late ethnic cities refer to an accelerated transformation in the use of space, which had already begun in the 5th century. At first, their use of abandoned structures for new functions reflect a quite pragmatic rethinking of the use of urban facilities. But from the 6th century onwards, a relationship between artisanal production centers and church buildings suggests a possible central role for the church in restructuring urban settlements. Two central spatial practices at this time involved a fragmentation of public and private spaces and an encroachment of public space. New domestic areas mainly derived from the subdivision and the refurbishment of older residential and public buildings. A notable feature in habitation after the 6th century was a convergence of rural with urban activities in all kinds of settlements everywhere. The development of this phenomenon shows an initial expansion of urban space in the countryside, as in some examples that we'll see soon, and a concurrent expansion of the rural space within the towns and the cities. From all these phenomena, we'll look at closer into two of these practices as examples that reveal aspects of a common cultural background behind all these phenomena that I already mentioned. So in respect to the transformation of the cities, I will talk about the subdivision of residential buildings by squatting or by intentional subletting of spaces. And in respect to the transformation of the countryside, I will talk about the occupation of offshore islands and islets. I'm not losing any time, and the subdivision of residential buildings by squatting or intentional subletting of spaces has been described and discussed by several scholars, starting with Simon Ellis and Ellen Sarandi. I'm sure you know hundreds of examples, and I'm just showing 3 on my screen. The most representative, the Villari in Cyprus, the Tricon Palace in Butrint, and the Southwestern Villa in Delphi. Consists of a process whereby walls or small rooms were built inside earlier buildings, common in both private and public, turning them into collections of communities of small apartments and or, depending on the case, workshops. When it comes specifically to private residential buildings, usually from the mid-6th century onwards, but with regional chronological variations, the old, large aristocratic villae of the Roman peristyle type were being subdivided into smaller units to offer dwelling space to more families. The traditional architectural features of earlier houses, such as the peristyle court and the triclinium, were converted into modest rooms. The phenomenon is ubiquitous, and the nature of this subdivision is common everywhere. Ellis showed as a key point of this practice that it represents a definitive architectural style, not a random distribution of walls above the building. Walls were built in specific locations that related to the architecture of the previous building. Thus, there was a definitive attempt to use the early architecture to create a new context and, in housing terms, new living space. Some of the principles of this new architectural culture were the following. The porticos of the peristyle were closed up by walls built in the intercolumnar space, while other transverse walls inside the porticos divided them into smaller rooms. Larger rooms, including the triclinia, were divided into smaller rooms by partition walls perpendicular to the entrance with a low wall topped with reused dressed stone. Wells were built of coarse, unplastered rubble, reusing architectural fragments. Walls were built on top of existing mosaic floors rather than destroying them. There is no doubt that the economic and social life of the new dwellers was in comparison modest. The material remains offer a striking contrast with the earlier luxurious ornaments in these houses. Finally, architectural installations and workshops are often found in these small units, while an exclusively industrial use was followed at a later stage. We will be coming back to the villa, but let's go to the second practice. It is dated during the same period when inhabitants of cities performed another different use of nearby offshore islands. This is only an indicative map. The sites are much more. The general practice of inhabiting offshore islands is known from a very big number of sites that saw occupation in particular in this period. And the number of sites eventually grows through new investigations of insular sites, while many more locations await still for investigation. So the archaeological evidence consisting of secular and religious architecture, pottery, glass, coin finds, seals, dating to the 6th to 9th centuries suggests that the formation of such settlements was a generalized phenomenon along the coast of the southern Aegean and the Ionian Sea. And that was not necessarily a new phenomenon, but I will explain how it is specific to this period. So small offshore islands around the coast of the Aegean Sea, for example, seem to have been settled for a variety of reasons in different periods of time in a strategic relationship with the coastal settlements in the opposite coast, from antiquity throughout the Byzantine period and later. On the basis of the available evidence, the following distinct uses of specific islands in specific times may be identified as specific uses or as combined uses. Majority of cases among the following 5 alternatives. So first, as refuges at times of threat coming from the hinterland, as loci of maritime traffic, as areas for the production and distribution of industrial products, as military stations or a station of the Byzantine Navy supply routes, finally as castra, as the large fortified settlements of the particular period. And among many possible uses, these different and occasionally combined indicate the vital role of islands within the settlement network from the 6th to 10th century. And again Luca is more skilled to talk about this. Graves are often found on these islands. They either form part of a settlement or of isolated cemeteries located here in an extramuros analogy. A central administration and military presence are attested on many islands by evidence of coins and seals, as well as by finds such as coin weights and belt buckles. A reappraisal of Byzantine insular archaeological sites seems a very interesting prospect in this respect, in order to investigate the mechanisms by which settlement networks were shaped or modified in different periods. The scarcity, though, of archaeological evidence is an obstacle for the discussion right now, but it is clear that such settlements were, first of all, intended to have a specific use according to their particular geographical location, offshore, very close to the coast, where commonly there is an urban center. Secondly, they were intended to have proper uses according to their geomorphology. And something well discussed by Günder Varlioglu recently. Thirdly, they do not seem to support the existence of an urban-rural dichotomy in settlement during this period, but rather a practiced merge of urban and rural functions. Although they have previously been considered countryside, they obviously often had functions conceived within an urban setting. For example, there were centers for secondary production and surplus distribution. There were posts of military administration or settlements that function as a complementary part of an existing urban center or as episcopal seats. Indeed, a practice of expansion of an urban culture into the countryside is indicated by the following particular attributes of some of these island settlements. One of those shown here on your screen, Kephalos Island in Epirus. So first, there is presence of infrastructures, fortifications, basilicas with baptistry, eventually industrial infrastructures, whose size is firstly out of balance with the sizes of the island and of the settlement it hosted. And secondly, it is also unusual for the particular location in comparison to earlier and later periods of time. So there is also an equally disproportionate density of expensive material culture, glass vessels, jewels, metal artifacts, fine pottery. And Dimitris Athanasoulis showed a very good example of that in the island of Romvi in the Argolic Gulf. I hope we can soon have a publication, but a lot of this you can today visit in the Museum of Argolis, hopefully after this situation is over. So all these finds, there is also serves as evidence for long distance trade. There is, for example, abundance of amphora. And sometimes industry. There is a pottery workshop, local vessels. There is also a recurrence of lead seals and coin with hoards, for example, large hoards amongst numerous stray coin finds. So the origin of these artifacts could not have been the island itself. There must have derived from economic, administrative, or military activity that takes place outside of this place at some urban center. And a relation with a contemporary urban center has sometimes been confirmed by specific finds of artistic connections, for example, such in the case of Kephalos, where artisans from Nicopolis were working in the basilicas. And in the case of Romvi, we have lead seals of Vasilios, the Bishop of Orovia, attested and confirming written sources, and it completely agrees with the picture offered by the archaeological excavations on the island of Romvi. So it seems that certain small islets located near urban centers, previously inhabited or not, received a stimulus during the 6th and 7th centuries from the presence of soldiers, bureaucrats, ecclesiastical administrators, and some citizens with safety concerns. So, the particular special practices inhabiting subdivisions of older residents and islets or islands who were largely ignored in other periods are contemporary and contextual. But what could have been the cultural meaning of these practices? How do they connect with each other? What could they have in common? Sarandi, the first case, suggests, Eleni Sarandi, that the inhabitants of subdivided dwellings were both squatters and tenants. Either they occupied abandoned houses whose original owners had fled, or they rented from owners who had converted their houses into income-producing properties as a response to new economic needs. Also as a response to increased demand for accommodation, perhaps, or to cultural changes. And by cultural changes, Sarandi refers to the similar phenomenon of subdivision of public buildings and porticos flanking avenues of cities. Those were also often rented to merchants and artisans by the municipalities in order to increase their revenues, or they were appropriated by wealthy owners of houses behind the colonnades and turned into commercial revenue-producing units, or squatted, or simply inhabited by the poorest citizens who lived on the street. She provides an elaborate account of these developments, which she interprets as a rapid disintegration of the urban space due to the abandonment and to an invasion by agricultural facilities and isolated burials. And we have Ine Jacobs who shed new light on this with her book recently. In the second case of the offshore islands use, these sites have commonly been known as isles of refuge in modern historiographical narratives, and they must have indeed provided refuge during this period. However, these sites seem in fact to have had multiple functions overall, which are all conceivable within an urban setting, despite the islet's obviously location outside of cities. So, in my opinion, based on spatial theory in Byzantine texts that I'll discuss in a minute, both cases simply reveal a brand new mentality around urbanism, manifested through practices of fragmentation, sharing, and expansion of the urban space. These practices, which seem to have been very dynamic, whether improvised or stately coordinated or both, were obviously aiming to redesign the city and to transform the notion of the city into something new and yet unknown. How? The practice of privatization and subdivision of urban properties reveals an economic dynamism that was no longer exclusive to the upper class, nor to the international caliber known from the Roman period, but one that was broadly based at a local level or of a rather limited economic strength in Elenis Sarandi's words. But the same dynamism applies to the expansion of the city space on the islands. And that practice involved also a different kind of squatting than the first practice, that means outside the city, which was occasionally successful enough to be formalized in the official announcement and centers of secular or religious administration. But this urban culture must have been completely different from its late antique predecessor. Despite eventual continuity of the urban identity. And that led Sarandi to distinguish between two kinds of Byzantine city in the 6th century. Now, on the other hand, the interpretation of this kind of changes in the 6th and 7th century urban fabrics through the ruralization argument is generally agreed upon. John Holden has refined on that interpretation by suggesting instead that we must think of the 6th to 8th century cities as progressively functioning like countrysides. Yet, if one looks to the culture of this spatial transformation, any analogies with the Byzantine countryside cannot really explain the two spatial practices here discussed. Whoever subdivided the peristyle houses, either squatters or owners and the tenants, built smaller houses with poor materials and basic techniques and neglecting some aesthetic values, but their intentions were not to transform the peristyle houses into farmhouse. First of all, the Pisan rubble stone building techniques were simply more solid. They are typical all over the empire. Secondly, even if the squatters or tenants were in fact peasants, they had obviously come to the city for some other reason than with the intention to become citizens. And thirdly, the cities of this period must be understood as rather presenting a functional life in which the sharp distinctions between the city and the country had dulled ever since the invasion of the country in the city already in the 5th century, in Michael Decker's words. Thus, a clear bipolar urban-rural pattern in lifestyle and settlement is very questionable during this period. In the second case of the settling of the offshore islets, the evidence shows that inhabitants also transferred their urban material culture on the new locations, with no real intention of adjusting to rural life. Instead, in both practices, people's main objective seems to have been to find refuge for their life and belongings and financial subsistence. And while these are reasonable hypotheses, archaeology has limited capacity to identify the specific attributes of these practices, as has also been recently observed in relation to encroachment by any Jacobs. On the contrary, a set of texts deriving from the same context refer to the ways in which 6th to 9th century societies practiced this fragmentation and subdivision of urban space. Numerous leasing contracts surviving in papyri from Egypt, as well as the architectural treaties by Julian of Ascalon, originating from Palestine, late antique Palestine, they bring the very agents of these practices in front of us. And now I will argue this point by discussing two texts. First of all, one of the leasing contracts that are very numerous, very interesting, discussed also by Eleni Sarandi, as well as some parts of the treatise. So, this 6th century leasing contract from Hermopolis. One reads, and I'll jump to the translation. In dictio, the existing two halls, one inside the other, one facing outwards to the north and one facing inwards to the east, together with the corresponding parts of the well, the court, the terrace, and the vaulted room in the basement looking east, and a room for storing hay, as well as all kinds of things which can fairly be used from the house, which lies in the quarter of the western citadel of Hermopolis on the Pakuk road facing north. For me to use and you will inside, and the rent for this becomes 6 carats per year, and I will give you this rent at the end of each year, no matter what, just like the other tenants. And whenever you will wish, I will hand over these same places to you with the doors and the same appearance they have when I am receiving them. The lease is valid and certain. I have been masked and confirmed, and there follow the signatures of the tenant, the scribe, and 2 witnesses. So this contract clearly presents a case of subdivision of a private property, which used to be a single residence. The result of this fragmentation is the emergence of a number of different apartments. The latter consist of, first, private rooms. In this case, 2 halls upstairs, 1 room and 1 storeroom downstairs. Second, shared spaces of common use by all residents. In this case, the court, a terrace, a well, and the things which is fair to use in the house. The apartments are rented to several tenants, just like the other tenants, it says, for an annual obligation of 6 carats paid after the service has been complete. In these new communities of co-residents, the owner retains a central role. Like nowadays, he has the right to reclaim his property anytime he wants, and he is responsible for ensuring that the tenants have maintained their part of the building properly. And a remarkable feature is the owner's claim for all his doors upon the tenant's checkout. The door is an architectural element not only susceptible to decay by time and use, but it's also vulnerable to spoiling. It is an expensive yet detachable part of the house, and one can expect people to have recycled doors of destroyed buildings. In this remark, an indication of a practice where people stole the doors from their current homes and reuse them in new constructions when they change residence. Judging from modern practices, this possibility cannot be discarded. Passing on to Julian of Ascalon, he reflects exactly the same practices of fragmentation and encroachment of urban spaces, to which it responds by regulating private agency. This is clearly stated in paragraph 15. It must be said that all that has been said above concerns new constructions. If, moreover, there are ancient maps, ancient documents, and previous use of the spaces, one has to conform to the original concluded agreements about them. So there is a clear distinction between old and new practices in construction and use of urban space. The old ones have to be protected against the invasion of newly established habits. The latter have to be controlled and regulated, hence the composition of his legal framework. In fact, there are plenty of descriptions of new practices in the text, involving numerous different acts of citizens' expansion into vacant urban spaces which seem to be available for use. Citizens seem to occupy empty space in order to install all kinds of business workshops, bakeries, pottery, metalwork and glass and plaster kilns, workshops, dyeing facilities, exactly as we see in the archaeological evidence. They also expand the use of their own properties way into the streets for commercial purposes or for parking and feeding their animals. And Julian complains about this. Julian's general concern is that these acts must respect a certain grid. Obviously, because the ancient grid has long been neglected and collapsed and forgotten, and the existence of some space for public use is claimed by Julian. Thus, his effort is to define the distance that the new constructions must have from pre-existing ones and the specific techniques to be used for some of these constructions. Residence subdivision practices are also discussed in the text as in our second extract. So here we read, in the case of a house containing a door, containing a door opening into a courtyard, if the owner of such a house, in order to access through such a courtyard of common use, to which he has a door. So if that owner wishes to construct another door, he can do that under condition that he first closes off the pre-existing door. Equally, if there is a storeroom in a courtyard of common use and it has a door opening either out or into the courtyard, if he wishes to open another door, he can do that provided that he first closes off the original door. Indeed, it would be unjust if he would be able to either fraudulently penetrate from one courtyard to the other through the house, or fraudulently penetrate to the common courtyard passing through the storeroom or the store by means of the thus open door. So there must have definitely been privacy issues. These practices of subdivision and cohabitation obviously caused problems as well. The new apartments, having once belonged to a single residence of a specific type with the rooms circumscribed around the central open courtyard, had not been planned as separate units. Thus, previous doors allowed for unforeseen violations of privacy. But then these new communities of co-residents need to establish new rules for the protection of everybody's privacy. And Julian attempts such an intervention by his detailed instructions for the constructions around domestic spaces of common use. His effort is in fact continued for several paragraphs where he offers very specific instructions about the division walls, the windows, etc., etc. And on the other hand, doors come forward again, these times as tools that ensure the accessibility and permeability of spaces and allowing flexibility. As in the list that we discussed before, here too, they don't have any specific identity of use. They can easily change use and function depending on the eventual needs. Not only this passage, also the entire treatise speak of spatial flexibility and agility. The ongoing mobility through spaces, commercial, residential, private, and public, reflects a dynamism and creativity, improvisation, and invention that lead to the intensive spatial transformation that we see in the archaeological evidence. Unfortunately, we don't have the same comparable sources for the offshore islands. However, the later Chronicle of Monemvasia, probably written in 10th or 11th century, gives an impression about the practices. Here we read, the city of Patras immigrated to the territory of Rhegium in Calabria, the Argives to the island called Orovi, and the Corinthians to the island called Aegina. The Laconans too abandoned their native soil at that time. Some sailed to Sicily and are still there. Others found an inaccessible place by the seashore, built a strong city there that they called Monemvasia because there's only one way of entering. And they settled there with a bishop. And the texts offer this reconstruction of settlement of offshore islands in the Peloponnese as a response to the threat coming from the hinterland in the shape of the Slav invasions. And the text has a lot of serious problems of credibility, and that has been discussed by previous researchers. But when it comes specifically to the relation of the offshore the offshore islands with the land settlements, urban centers on the hinterland, the text seems to confirm the relation between them. So this is also as much as I can read in archaeology and text about the reasons that led people in Byzantium to subdivide, sublet, squat, or expand their occupation to unsettled land. And yet there is another way to look at this phenomena. And this is my last point. By going back to spatial theory and investigating the meaning of the spatial practice used by the Byzantine citizens. And the geographer Nigel Thrift, with his non-representational social theory, suggested this hermeneutical approach. Instead of studying and representing social relationships, let's focus upon practices, that is, on how human and non-human formations are performed. Let's focus upon let's not focus simply upon what is produced. Thus, his perspective is not concerned with propositions and denials, but with insights. Not with what was done, but with how it was done. This theory is about practices, mundane, everyday practices that shape the conduct of human beings or birds towards others and themselves in particular sites. And so in scrutiny of the particular practices reveals that subdivision, fragmentation, sharing, and expansion of the urban space are globally and historically established and recurrent social practices. Squatting, hand-me-down housing, purpose-built tenements, as well as informal forms of settlements from pirated subdivisions to irregular peri-urban townships, represent a few examples of many different strategies of shelter adopted by the urban poor. They are the most basic ways to give form to the need for housing and shelter. They often result from countless everyday acts of adjustment, negotiation, and improvisation, and they have an informal, makeshift, provisional, and even precarious character. From a cultural perspective, the hidden history of these practices is the achronic global history. From European cities to favela in Brazil, barriadas in Peru, Kiyi in Kenya, Jorapati in India, there is a history of makeshift cottages, precarious and informal settlements, experimental housing initiatives, and radical autonomous communities. It is a story shaped by a complex patchwork of customary beliefs and rites, and epitomized in the widespread view that if you can build a house between sunset and sunrise, then the owner of the land cannot expel you. As for the fragmentation of urban space by encroachment and subdivision, and even enclosing and gating, it is also found in all continents, from China to the Americas, in different forms associated with intense social change. Urban fragmentation is both a process of deconstructing the perception of a former urban entirety and of reconstructing a fragmentary urban space. Scholarly interpretation of these practices have traditionally seen them as expression of proper housing precarity or as attempts to construct a radical alternative to more traditional forms of dwelling. However, more recent focalized research in cultural geography has shown a different meaning of these alternative housing practices in time of economic crisis. In those times, life for a growing number of city dwellers is reduced to a permanent state of emergency, characterized by an inadequate supply of basic resources and absence of discernible infrastructures and institutions. This state of emergency also describes an unstable process of adaptation and improvisation that enables a community to experience its life and realities in their own terms. Housing construction and maintenance within informal settlements, such as the Byzantine islets, reveals how residents learn to operate in contexts of profound urban inequality. To encroach means, in this context, to open up a space for piecing together an alternative urban life through an endless adaptability and capacity for improvisation and invention. This process depends on the productive deployment of sensibilities, practices, and materialities that are themselves made possible by the very uncertainties incumbent within cities. So squatting, for example, is read as a makeshift urbanism, where particular emphasis is placed on the dense matrix of practices that are central to how spaces and communities are pieced together, secured, and lived. The fragmentation and subdivision of urban spaces, on the other hand, comes also as a sign of crisis, as an expression of an increase of fear and distrust of central administration, usually accompanied by privatization of the. So, to conclude, these conditions fit well aspects of late antique societies in the Byzantine Empire, and especially those of the 6th to 8th centuries. Fear of external enemies and of economic crisis, privatization of economic sectors, distrust, restructuring of urban politics, improvisation, invention. The special practices we considered seem to have sprung out and dependent upon social change and the provisional urban politics, which was continuously made and remade. Their marginalization could be read differently as a zone of association and possibility survival and subversion within the general rearrangement of available space and under the universal quest for reinvention of the city and of the overall settlement patterns. This need was manifested in people's claims of spaces as an exercise in placemaking, where building one's own home meant creating his own world. These agencies are manifested both in material culture and in the narrative aspects of official texts that we've read. Archaeology shows that this seeking for an alternative city, in fact, resulted in several alternatives of urbanism that ended up to the fortified Byzantine castrum. This is probably as much as I could currently dig in archaeology texts and social cultural theory to learn about the reasons that led people in Byzantium to subdivide, to sublet, to squat, and to occupy unsettled land, practicing fragmentation and expansion of their urban space. Archaeology, on one hand, offers information on people's life when they no longer exist. Texts, on the other hand, offer the very people speaking voices at the same time when they are handling their lives through the development of practices. The further investigation of Byzantine spatial practices and their historical circumstances from a socio-cultural perspective can produce some modest conceptual signposts for building alternative approaches to shared city life during that period, which resonate both within specific settlements and across a broader translocal landscape. I try to show that such transformations involve spatial practices whose cultural interpretation turns out central for our deciphering of profound social change of that period. Following the ancient instructions by Julian of Ascalon on the screen, the old uses and management rules of spaces allow us to strongly suggest that the investigation of spatial practices is important because it entails passing from a topography of power to a geography of power within the Byzantine studies. I hope I didn't tire you very much. Thank you very much for your attention and for everybody, for anyone who would like to read more. This is an open access publication at the Heidelberg University Library. It's Beate's book on the transformations of city and countryside, where you can find this and many, many more, much more research on this period. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Myrto. It was an all-encompassing and really wonderful talk. I have some questions on my own, but since I don't want to steal the thunder, we'll open the floor to questions first, and in case I will jump to my question. I think the first one has already been answered by Alessandro. Yes, no, it's another one. Is there a published or unpublished corpus of notarial documents related to Constantinople for the period between the 5th and the 10th centuries?
Well, there's a lot of texts, but if there is a corpus, I can't answer that.
Okay, second one is asking you about the climate change mentioned on the slide, transformation in Byzantium. I'm currently dealing with historical climate changes and their impact on the Roman world, also about the infamous and still controversial plague. Late antiquity, Little Ice Age apparently lasted at least till the end of the 7th century. However, last research, which I don't necessarily trust, tried to prove that the impact of the plague of Justinian and climate changes were rather of minor importance for dismantling late antique urbanism. So I think he's asking to, Michael Payton is asking, and greetings for Edinburgh, by the way, from him, and he's asking if climate change is impacting upon the model you have presented us with, or you think it may in the future, if I can interpret the question.
Yeah, it is Adam's work. Adam Izdebski has been publishing a lot on this, and he has very interesting conclusions for Asia Minor. I hope he will keep expanding now with his project. So yeah, but this is a very, very young research still. So it will be very interesting in the next step. So when we really understand all the changes that are now attested through archaeological finds, especially along the coasts, that are the more vulnerable, geologically vulnerable areas, we can go forward to looking more closely at the relation between settlement and climate change.
So there is no other question for the time being, apart from the greetings that we received from Ali Doru Karaman. Welcome back. I have a question on my own, since we are waiting for do you think that by identifying those islands of islands that you were describing, little islets, I would rather call it, you basically found the second tier, of that Byzantine koine that Athanasius Dionis, Paul Arthur have been describing at, I mean, urban level, obviously. And in this way, because I fully agree with you, reading the functionalities, okay, of the, reading the transformation of, or the trajectory of urban sites from the functional point of view. Think how much we agree with each other, I think, on this. And do you think that in this way we can, in a sense, I mean, since it's a second tier of the Byzantine koine, okay, that we have always, sorry if I repeat myself, look at from the urban perspective, right? Syracuse, Otranto, so on, Butrint itself, and so on and so forth. So it's a kind of view, a different view of the urban transformation spurred by the periphery rather than by the center. And when I say the center, I mean Amorium, Ankara itself, and so on and so forth. Do you think that's the case?
I couldn't agree more with you, Luca. So I think the most vital space for Byzantium is the Aegean Sea. We can see that throughout the centuries, how it was, with all the struggle, you know, to keep it from the Arabs. And there's been continuous investment on the islands by the inhabitants, struggle to keep it. There's been development in every possible way, despite the problems it presented. But yeah, I think you're right.
Wonderful, Myrto. Thank you so much. Other question. There were 2 yellow dots on offshore island maps. One was off the western coast of the Mani Peninsula. It was there. Can you elaborate upon this island settlement over there off the coast of the Mani Peninsula? If you happen to know.
Yeah. A second. Yeah, can you see?
Yes, we can see those. I think he's referring to those yellow dots.
Yeah, so this is Monemvasia, of course, and Alafonisos in Tigani.
So that's the answer. I mean, Monemvasia and Tigani.
So yeah, continuous habitation from the end of 6th, 7th century onwards. You can find the publications in my article, Byzantine History Settlement Stories on Academia. So there is a large section on offshore islands, and there is some, I have compiled some bibliography that you may find useful.
Thank you very much. Let's see if there is any other question coming up. If not, I would like to personally thank you so much, I mean, for this amazing talk. And I already read the article, so that added up to the article. I'm very good. When it comes to your publication, I'm very good. I'm reading them instantly. So thank you so much, Myrto, for accepting our invitation. Looking forward to having here in person, okay, and one way or another. And fingers crossed, hope everything's going to be fine with you. And before leaving the floor to Sergiano Già for the final greetings, I would like to thank Fermudegu, Sevinci, Aishemullah, and Yunus Doğan, because they are taking care of all the media outlet or media part, media outlets of ByzantiumatAnkara. So thank you so much. Myrto, take care. Thank you so very much. And looking forward to talking to you soon in person, finally. Sergiano Già, The floor is yours.
Thank you. I will just we will have another lecture in March. Looking forward to seeing you all there. Thank you very much, Myrto. It was nice meeting you and hearing this magnificent talk. So take care and hope you see you next time. So
thank you very much for having me here. It was delighted to talk to you.
Thank you, Myrto. Take care. See you soon.